we're going to talk about a new resource for studying the Bible. It's called the Dictionary of the New Testament Use of the Old Testament. And I'm joined today by Dr. Benjamin Glad, who's one of the editors for it. So Ben Glad, Ben, thanks for joining us in this video. You are one of the editors of this new resource, the Dictionary of the New Testament Use of the Old Testament, which is quite big, along with Greg Beale and Don Carson and Andy Naselli. Can you tell us something about what is this resource?
Yeah, we use the word dictionary there, but when most people hear the word dictionary, they think this word means that. That's not what this dictionary is. In fact, it's very confusing. Bible dictionaries do not do those things. This dictionary means something akin to an encyclopedia. This is really an encyclopedia of the New Testament use of the Old. So we came up with a huge list of all these essays that should be done, and that's what this is. It's about 900,000 pages.
Pages?
900,000 words. Let's say pages. Man, that would be something. That would be like a Craig Keener commentary. 900,000 words, 140-ish. I can't remember the precise number for how many essays there are, but many authors all over, and it just came out about a month ago.
Now, the title of this might be familiar because it sounds like the commentary on the New Testament use of the Old Testament, which has been out for a number of years. So introduce that volume to those watching and explain how those two resources relate.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, Greg Beale reached out to Don Carson and said, hey, I got an idea. Let's have a group of contributors write a verse by verse ish or passage by passage on the New Testament's use of the Old. So all the quotations would be covered in the major allusions. And so they decided to make that happen. So they sent out all these invitations. Most people said yes. That came out in the fall of 2007, I believe. And it's about a 900,000 word count there, but that is a commentary from Matthew to Revelation, really from Matthew 1 to Revelation 22. It's just, it's evaluating all the quotations and the major allusions. So it reads like a commentary. There's a lot of sort of technical stuff in there. Scholars, you learn a great deal from that. Pastors go to it as well. It really is a tremendous resource. This, however, is not that. This is a dictionary. This is an encyclopedia of all the various components. It's sort of what's happening behind the scenes when these scholars evaluate quotations and allusions. What is an allusion? What is a quotation? What is the Septuagint? And it tackles all of these issues that are relevant for examining the New Testament use of the Old.
So, why is that such an important question when we're coming to biblical interpretation? Why do we need this resource? Well, what's distinctive about how it adds to our hermeneutical approach to Scripture?
Yeah, so in the last 30, 40 years, depending on when you want to start it, scholars have been very interested in how New Testament authors quote and allude to the Old Testament. And this is a larger conversation of just the academy got tired of looking at sources behind the New Testament. And so it's really an emphasis on the text itself. And so what happened is that over time, the last 30 or 40 years, we've begun to appreciate more deeply how the New Testament authors are reading the Old Testament. We can see the reading strategies. We can start to map these things out. And we are really, it's probably in a state of maturity here, but there are no signs of slowing down. And really, what is the net result? The net result is that we can see how the Bible is unified around a single story and how the apostles are really, really into it. It's exciting, it's enriching, it's life-giving. And this dictionary, I hope, my prayer is that it will go a long way in making that a reality for most people.
Now, maybe you can say something about the types of articles that are here. You've maybe alluded to that some, but you have articles on New Testament books, Old Testament books, topics. Could you maybe give a sample for what's in it?
Yeah, so this volume has a couple different dimensions to it. One is a more technical piece, and that would be articles on the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and how the Old Testament itself, when these Greek translators, they're actually doing biblical theology, and we can study that, we can learn that. We also have a number of great essays, very difficult essays to write on the pseudepigrapha's use of the Old Testament. If you don't know what the pseudepigrapha is, that's okay. It's just these Jewish writings that often comment on the Old Testament. Then we have essays on Qumran. The Qumran sect was very much into the Old Testament, so we can see how they read it. So we have all of these sort of more technical things, and then we also have essays on that are very biblical, theological in nature. In fact, these are so good. These essays are so good. I think that this is in direct competition with the longstanding IVP New Dictionary of Biblical Theology that came out decades ago, that really was ahead of its time in many ways. And so that these essays on, let's say, the glory of God, or Adam, you did the one on Adam, or resurrection, you did that one too. There are all these essays that contributors wrote that sort of bring everything together. They're biblical, theological, they're Old Testament, New Testament, pulling that together. We also have surveys from Matthew to Revelation, sort of a synthesis of how these New Testament authors in each book refer to the Old Testament. And then we've got a number of sort of, we call them theological essays, like theological interpretation, theological interpretation of Scripture, on bibliology, stuff like that. And then we also have the history of this, so how the early church read the Old Testament and those sorts of things. So it's great. I mean, it took a ton of work to pull this together, but we are really, really pleased with the final product.
So this is for a range of different readers, in students, pastors, scholars. Would you say all of those categories are in view and would be read this with profit?
Yes, that's exact. There. So those biblical theology essays are accessible for even high schoolers to read it, college students, certainly pastors. I think those are excellent introductions to those topics, biblical theological topics. I also forgot to mention one of the key unique features of this project is we've got Old Testament surveys from Genesis to Malachi on how the Old Testament uses the Old Testament. So we've got the use of the Old Testament in Exodus, the use of the Old Testament in Psalms and in Hosea. So we go book by book all the way through the Old Testament. And nobody does that. No, it's exceptionally rare to find a book that does that. And it's even rare to find one that's done by evangelicals in a volume such as this. So really, there are so many unique facets to this volume that there's something in there for everybody.
Now, you've mentioned a number of the contributions, but are there perhaps some highlights or something that really stands out that wowed you, or that might be particularly interesting to readers?
Yeah, I mean, as I read it over the years, we had this approach where we lined up certain essays to be done before and later, and so you kind of have to stagger this project. And some of the ones that stuck out to me that I thought were quite good, I really like Mark Seifert on justification. His is one of the first essays that came in. I thought it was quite good. And Alan Thompson on Luke's use of the Old Testament was absolutely terrific. In fact, Alan is replacing Howard Marshall's. I'm sorry, did I say Luke? Acts use of the Old Testament. In fact, Alan Thompson is replacing Howard Marshall's essay on Acts in the commentary for the next edition of that. The one on Revelation is quite good by Sean McDonough. I really could go down all the way through, and because I have sort of what happens when you're an editor is that you have each essay has its own personality and its own difficulties, and so you're trying to sort out these difficulties with each reader, and so everyone has its own story. And I almost could go through the entire volume and tell you little stories, little little histories of each essay, and that would take me hours. But yeah,
Well, yeah,
it's really hard. Does that make sense? It's
yeah.
hard to kind of get behind some of this.
Well, there's not time to go into detail into this volume, but we wanted to take a few minutes and introduce you to it, tell you a little bit about what's in it and what's behind it, and encourage you, if you're interested in biblical theology, that this might be a resource that you could look to. And now, Ben, maybe you could mention any other projects like this that might be in the works that you could mention.
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, Baker has issued a revision for the commentary. Greg Beale, Don Carson, and I, the three of us, are revising it, and we hope. I mean, we've signed contracts. The revisers have signed contracts, so that's going to hopefully come out like 2026 ish, 2027. So the 2027 would be the 20-year anniversary, and so the idea is to reintroduce the commentary to a new generation of students. So that's out there. Greg Beale and I are working on a big study Bible for the CSB, just a New Testament study Bible, which is odd, but it's a sort of a lay level use of the old and the new, and so we just go all the quotations, the major allusions. Contributors are working on that, so yeah, we're excited about that. And there's a lot of interesting pieces to that as well.
Good stuff. So thanks for Ben Glad for joining us today to tell us a little bit about this and other projects. And if you're interested in biblical theology, you may want to check them out. So thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Remember to keep it clear and focus on Christ.